Hey, welcome to another episode of the Peanut Gallery. We have my friend with us today, Andrea.
Hello.
Welcome to the Peanut Gallery. As always, Trevor and Patrick are in the gallery.
Hello, I am here.
Hello. Hey, so we, first of all, we want to say thanks.
Yeah. No
And
problem.
everybody's like, why? Why are you saying thanks? It was National Paramedics Week. National American.
Not sure
Thank
the
you.
extent of it, but yes, paramedic
There
week.
was a paramedic week last week. Thank you. And you are a paramedic.
I
So
am.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you for
welcome.
all you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. So what I wanted to talk with you about a little bit is the whole world of what it means to be a medic, because you're an ambulance driver, right?
No. No.
No?
Very
No?
wrong.
No.
Sorry, bye.
I don't know if you can see her anger. All right, so there's no more ambulance drivers. That's
No.
all. Okay, all right.
Very old.
All right,
term.
we'll get into that yet. I just wanted to see if I get a reaction. I got it. So let's start with, who are you? Tell us a little bit about your background, and then kind of lead us into how you ended up as a medic.
I've been a medic for 17 years, just over 17 years.
Yep.
So basically out of high school, you grow up and I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. Well, you want to be a doctor because you don't know anything else about the medical field.
Right.
And so once I became old enough to actually know what was what and the different options that were around, I really sort of leaned towards paramedicine in the hectic stress of 1999 when I was graduating school.
You graduated in 1999?
I did, yes.
Right before crazy Y2K.
Yes.
Oh, snap.
And so as a result, it was, the computers are the way of the future. So, on your college application, you can make 5 choices. And I put 4 computer engineering programs and
really?
1 paramedic program. I did. So I actually went into computer engineering first.
Oh.
About halfway through my first semester, I came home at Thanksgiving and said to my parents, I'm like, I don't think I want to keep doing this. And so they, of course, thought I was failing miserably, which I wasn't. I was actually getting straight A's. I was doing very well. It was all sort of, physics, math based, which I'm good at, but I just couldn't see myself doing it. Ever, let alone for a lifetime. So I successfully finished that semester and then came back and got myself into the paramedic program. And I've been doing it ever since.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit. So what does a paramedic program look like? Because one of my things growing up, at least, you talked about coming out of high school and you're like, oh, we should be a doctor. I always felt like I wish I would have known the endless other options that were available to me in high school.
Well, me too, because there's so many.
Right? And maybe that's part of the issue. Is like when you go into some of those restaurants, you got like 14 pages of menu. You're like, this is too much. This is too much. I want one.
I feel you. I feel your pain.
But there are so many options. So what does it look like? What is a paramedic program? How many years are involved? That kind of thing.
Well, it's 2 years.
Yep.
If you're lucky enough to get straight into the paramedic program, it's fairly competitive. Not that means I'm super smart. I think I just got really, really lucky.
I feel like you just said computer engineering to this. We all assume you're very smart. So expectations for this interview have just skyrocketed. But carry on.
No pressure. So it is competitive to get into the program. There's a lot of people applying to it. So sometimes you don't get in right away.
Mm-hmm.
Most times, at least back when I was applying, most times you didn't get straight into the paramedic program unless you already had like an undergrad or something like that. And so you would often have to go to a pre-health science, which is 1-year program. It's not the same as the paramedic program. They are separate programs, but it's sort of a prerequisite just to make sure that you actually know that you can do it, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of health-based, lots of maths and sciences and that kind of thing. So I did that first, and then I went into the paramedic program, which was 2 years, fairly intensive. Actually, I don't think this September, but this 2022, I believe it's actually going to a 3-year program.
Oh, okay.
So
this is college? So you like the Fanshawe, that type of place?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, there is a paramedic degree in Toronto. And I'm not going to say the college, and it's a college-university combination course. And I'm not entirely sure who it's through, but you would do the paramedic program first in college, and then you would go and do 2 years of theory, and you end up with a degree. So there is that option as well, which is sort of not a lot of places offer it, but it's there.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So what, just because a lot of us don't know, what you said paramedicine, what does a paramedic do? Like what areas do you cover? And then if you could, well, just kind of tell you where we're heading. What are the different layers? Because I'm assuming there's like the guys that go on the helicopters at the same level, is at a different level. What does that kind of look like in regards to the way it is in Ontario, at least?
There's 3 different levels of paramedics in Ontario. Each level has a certain scope, which is fairly broad. It would take a while to sit and list every single thing that we can do.
In detail, Andrea, we got time.
But suffice it to say that from sort of lowest to highest level would be your primary care paramedic, which is what we have here in Elgin County.
Okay.
Your next level would be your advanced care. So there's a combination of primary care and advanced care in a lot of different services. For example, Oxford as well as London. They both have the primary care and advanced care. And then your critical care, while there are some critical care land paramedics and land ambulances, mostly in Toronto, I believe, some of the major hubs in Canada, or Ontario, I should say. Most of the critical care paramedics are found in Orange in the helicopter. Sorry, I keep hitting that.
We have a low budget, so please try not to ruin everything in here.
I'm really afraid for the tech guy's ears, actually. Sorry.
That's okay. He's young.
It's okay.
fine.
I'll survive.
So now where were we? We were talking paramedicine.
Yes. So critical care in the helicopters.
Yes. Okay. So it's somebody who is curious about the program, somebody who is like, maybe, they're in high school, they're thinking maybe there's something they want to do, or an adult who wants to switch careers. What advice would you give to them, or maybe things to think about before you decide to become a medic? Because you got a bit of experience now, right? And it's a unique job. Like, it's not for everybody. Those that love it a lot.
Yes.
But it isn't for everybody.
No.
So you got some advice that you'd give to people?
Well, first, you need to sort of have a bit of an idea of what you're getting into. And I say a bit because you're never going to fully understand everything that you might see and do as a paramedic, much like as a firefighter.
Right.
But a little bit. So in other words, if you can't stand the sight of blood or yucky things, then perhaps it's not for you.
Right.
And there have been, students that we've had where I'm kind of like, why are you here? They were smart. They were great.
Yeah.
They could have done the job, but they just couldn't stand some of the things. So I guess, just sort of wrap your head around a little bit of that. But if you're keen in that kind of stuff and it doesn't really, doesn't bother you too much, then it's not rocket science. It's just training and a lot of reading and a lot of schooling. But,
but there's a lot of variety. Like
a huge ton amount of.
So you guys do everything from like hazmat calls to trauma to short of breath to
anything you'd call 911 for, really. So, and you'd get a bunch of us too, right? So, but yeah, there's definitely a wide variety. And one of the reasons I wanted to work in Elgin is because of that variety. So we cover everything from water accidents to farming accidents, in town, your meat and potatoes of paramedicine, your chest pains, your short of breaths, your mental health calls, which kind of happen anywhere.
Right.
Your drug overdoses, your highway accidents. So there's just a lot of variety. And my mother said to me one time, she's like, it's a little morbid that you want, bad stuff to happen. I said, I don't want bad stuff to happen. Not at all. But it's inevitable. And, if I can be the one there to gain that experience and to use my skills, which I feel are okay, then, then all the better, right? The more I learn, and I like to learn, so.
And our experience with you is that your skills are okay. They're pretty good.
They're okay.
They're pretty good. That's how we met. It was on one of the more traumatic calls that we've been on for a while ago. That's how we met.
Yes.
In the hospital, chatting
right.
afterwards.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an interesting way to meet, but we've connected since and so I want to talk about that a little bit. We got so many different topics, but real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Fire. Why in the world is a fire department called? So this happens often. So I want a paramedic's response to this, not the firefighters. But why would you, on a 911 call, not just fire, but police, so people often, they'll call 911, they'll want the ambulance, and both fire and police and EMS show up. Why is the system created that way, and what's the advantages to it?
Well, it's called tiered response. Is sort of the basic nutshell of what it is. We respond together. I don't know all the ins and outs about dispatch, so forgive me to anyone who knows better and if I might get any of this wrong, but my understanding is there is an OPP call center where all 911 calls go into. From there, they'll ask you, do you want police, fire, EMS? So you may not say police, you may say you want EMS, for example. Oftentimes, OPP will still remain on the line to see the nature of the call. If you're saying, well, my mom fell and broke her ankle, police will hang up. You won't even know that they've been on the line, and no big deal. That's definitely an EMS call. Yep. If someone says, someone's been shot and, it's out in the middle of the open and it's clearly police should be there, well, then the police dispatch will let the local police know. They'll be on their way. EMS will be on their way. And the reason fire often gets tiered is because they can often have a quicker response time, certainly so in the big municipalities and cities. And as well as here, sometimes we will show up at the same time. So not always a quicker response, but if we are already on a call, then maybe the EMS unit might be coming from further away, in which case you guys would be the first ones there. And fire has medical training. It isn't exactly the same as what a paramedic is trained to, but you certainly have advanced medical training, really great medical training.
Really great. The instructor is phenomenal.
I've heard that.
You're really good.
I've really heard that. Yeah. And so you guys have certainly more than your basic first aid and CPR for sure. And so, and with you having oxygen and some medications and a defibrillator and having that knowledge, you guys arriving is a benefit to the patient. So if you guys can arrive sooner, then that's great. And I think in bigger municipalities it's really good English, right? Bigger municipalities.
Really Computer science, it wasn't English, it's fine.
It was not an English major. In London, there are many more fire stations than there are EMS stations. Yep. And as such, the fire will often be able to get there sooner. So if there's even some basic stuff that fire can do to help and to benefit the patient, then that's why.
Okay, so we got into an interesting conversation before we got started here. Okay. That I hadn't even thought about asking about, but I mentioned that asking if you're an ambulance driver, and you were immediately offended. And turned a good shade of red. And I could see that I had gotten a good reaction, which was nice. But then we got into a conversation about actually the history because there used to be a time where there was ambulance drivers and all that. So give us a bit of a background of what EMS is, and then end that with a little bit, when you show up now, what are you guys equipped to do? What if somebody calls 911, what are they expecting to see? Kind of what are your roles? I know it's a huge question, but just kind of basics. Because if you haven't called 911 or you haven't dealt with it before, it can be a bit overwhelming.
For sure. Okay, so the background of ambulances. Okay, so pretty
it
broad.
Sounds boring, but it's really good. No. Okay, so there was once.
Once upon a time.
Yes, exactly.
Once upon a time, I guess. And again, I don't know all the history, so forgive me if I have any of this.
We're assuming you're right. You probably read it on the internet somewhere. I'm sure it's fine.
I think it was The Star or something, like a really reputable newspaper somewhere. So ambulances at one point came out of, they were stationed, I guess if you will, in funeral homes. So, it used to be sort of just throw them in the back of the truck. If they were still alive, take them to the hospital. And if they weren't, well, I guess you're going back to the funeral home. Back in the day when there's one funeral home that offered services for everybody. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really any medical care. You weren't on back then yet? No, not even. I'm not that old. I think we're around the same age here.
I was just asking
Andrea. No, yeah. I was not on. Not at all. This is a long time ago. But there wasn't really any medical care given. Like there was no oxygen carried. There was nothing. It was literally just throw them in the back and drive.
Oh, really?
I would hazard to guess that I'm not even sure if there was actual medics in the back doing anything. Maybe if the patient was alive, perhaps, I guess. But there just wasn't a lot of medical care. Yeah. So they truly were ambulance drivers. That's what they did. And then that sort of progressed to you would have someone who did have medical experience and then an ambulance driver. So nowadays, when we switch back and forth with myself and my partner, who I work with for the whole shift, we'd go back and forth and do call for call. in that next transition after just the ambulance driver, it would be the one person in the back. Maybe they were a qualified paramedic, maybe they weren't, but they were the ones with the medical experience. And the other person literally was just an ambulance driver, which nothing wrong with that. But where it comes to be mildly offensive, I suppose. I mean, it's all a joke at
By
this
mildly,
point. But
it's not mildly. Please don't ever do that, Bill.
Paramedics do get a little not happy, I guess, a little irate. Ever since the early 2000s, it was mandated by the government that anyone working in an ambulance had to be a fully qualified paramedic. So that was that big change.
Yeah.
So there was a number of years, I think there was about 4 or 5 years, where anyone who did not have that designation, they had that handful of years in order to go back to school, challenge the exam, do whatever it is that they needed to do to become a fully qualified paramedic. And ever since then, you have to be a paramedic in order to work in the ambulance. And so there is no longer just those ambulance drivers where that was their job. Now it's, we go call for call. There isn't one of us that drives all the time or one of us that attends all the time. And, we actually do have medical training. So I guess it kind of stems from that. It signifies maybe a lack of medical training when the term ambulance driver is used, I suppose.
Well, and because a lot of the cases you go to, it's not cut and dry. It's not like you just show up and you go, okay, well, the arm is cut. Okay, well, we can deal with that. A lot of it it's internal. You're guessing. There's symptoms involved, and you're trying to, because the goal of, if I could say paramedicine, the goal is to stabilize to get to the hospital. Would that be kind of accurate and saying?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you guys treat some stuff up front. Obviously,
there's lots of things,
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is, you want to get them stabilized and into a good place so they can be transported. And if there's further tests needed, then so be it. Would that be accurate?
Yes. And in stabilizing, in some cases, not to pat anyone on the back who's a medic, but in some cases,
it's okay.
Stabilizing is saving lives, right?
It was Appreciation Week last week. You're fine. Pat yourselves on the back. You guys are awesome.
It should be 2 weeks. I'm just saying.
It should be 2 weeks.
But,
and a raise would be cool. But whatever. No one's listening. It's fine.
Race would be great. So, I mean, we do. You're right. Absolutely. We stabilize, we treat what we can treat, and we do take them to the hospital. And oftentimes, pre-hospital medicine or emergency medicine, it's, there's often more that needs to be done at the hospital. There's more medications that need to happen. Maybe there's surgery that needs to happen, further diagnostic testing that just can't be done pre-hospital.
Because it's such a wide spectrum. Like, it's an unbelievable amount of equipment you'd have to carry to pull all that off, right? Like,
it just
even now
be
already what you have.
Yeah. I mean, and you've probably come into Emerge with us when, we've gone into, say, a full resus room, and the amount of equipment, like you say, is just... There's just no possible way anything mobile could be done there.
And even the amount of people involved at that point.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are at least a dozen in the Emerge, and it's, it goes from there, right? Because you've got your RTs, you've got your x-ray techs, you've got your, if there's surgeons, if they have to go through there, you've got your nurses on the floor, you've got your rehabilitation, and the amount of people that it takes for someone who is critically ill to actually become better and get home is just exponential. Like, I can't even list everybody.
It's kind of cool the amount of effort, and resources we have to help us live well. Like, when you think about the amount of staff that we have when something goes wrong with your body, and there's still, there's so many ways to go, right? But with cancer and all these other diseases that we still haven't cured, but how far we've come is unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Even our ability to bring people back from cardiac arrest and a bunch of these other things that, at this point, you'd love to be able to do it for everybody, but where we've come is pretty phenomenal. And so it's very, very cool to see and very much appreciated. And there's a lot of people on that list that do not get enough credit.
No, for sure. There's people on the list. I don't even know how to pronounce what they do. There's so many people.
Right. Well, I don't even know how to pronounce your last name. So guaranteed I wouldn't know how to pronounce them, but if you would.
All right, Andrea, I have a question. You've been at it for 17 years.
Yes.
So, and I know there's, working with young people in my field, there's a lot of guys and girls that are entering and want to enter into paramedicine. They've expressed that interest. What can you speak to in terms of expectations of barriers that, depending if you're male or female, that you've experienced? Do those things still actively exist the same as what they did before in terms of maybe just some stereotypes or actual barriers? Or is there anything like systemic to how the system is set up that you've noticed as a difficulty to overcome, being female and in a field where typically probably for a long time it was majority males doing paramedicine, but from what I've seen, there's a huge amount of women that are now doing paramedicine, and I think it's fantastic. If it's your gifting and talent, like, is there anything that we should be changing or thinking about to make it not simpler, but so that the experience is better for everybody as they get into the field and as they get to live out what they believe is their calling in life?
Well, there were, in terms of barriers being female. When I got in 17 years ago, I mean, there are certainly female medics in the field, and certainly many who have been doing it longer than me. But there definitely it was a male-dominated field, for sure. So there were some, sort of stigma stereotypes and everything that you sort of had to get past and, maybe take everything with a grain of salt and not be too sensitive. But nowadays, you're right, there's way more females in the paramedic program. And in fact, in some services, and I'd hazard to guess Elgin might even be one of them, there's even more females than there are males. So that I feel like that stigma has pretty well ended. I don't really feel like that's a challenge, but maybe that might be a question for someone who's gone through the program recently. But it doesn't appear to be a challenge. And in terms of any other barriers, I don't think so. Just a matter of whether, you think you can do it. I know, and this might not be exactly what you're talking about, but I used to be an incredibly shy person. And people who know me now say, no, that's not even possible. I was going to say, what? Yeah, but the fact is that that's something that you would have to get over in terms of a barrier. You have to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to take control of a scene, take control of a situation. And you, in your last question, you had asked, what do people expect from you? They expect you to come and take control because they expect that, okay, now EMS is here, or even when fire arrives, okay, now the professionals are here, so that's it. Like, everything's going to be fine. And, we hope it will. And, but, sometimes it's not. But they look to you to take control of the situation in whatever the situation is. And that can be difficult for people in terms of a barrier. But I can't think of any others off the top of my head.
Well, it's also a very physical job.
Yeah, that is true.
People don't always consider, because you're taking people out of some pretty awkward spaces. When a fire is there, we can help. But even then, often you got 4 people on, because stairways aren't, especially in the old days, they didn't design stairways with
no.
Can a stretcher fit down this thing well, right? So there's the physical part of it. And then there's also the mental part of it that we want to talk about a little bit, and this will lead into that is dealing with trauma. So we've talked a bit before. If you listen to previous podcasts, we talked with Brent about stress management, or the critical incident stress management teams that we have in place. So we talked a bit about it from a fire standpoint.
Right.
What's that like for you guys from a medic standpoint?
It's a little bit more difficult. Medics are stubborn at heart. We just are. And we're very resistant to helping. It's funny because we like to help everyone else, but I'm fine. I'm good. I'm okay. But it's still rewarding. I mean, and we work in twos, right? Which is much different than the fire department, as you know, where there could be 30, 40 people at a call. So the big mass group debriefings that you think of when you think of CISM, because that's how the fire department works. Yeah. For us, it's more just going and seeing the crew, or making a phone call or something to the crew who responded to a bad call, asking how they're doing. It's more of a one-on-one thing. And that's kind of how CISM works with the paramedic field, I guess.
So do you guys have something sort of in place? Because, people who don't follow emergency services probably aren't aware, but suicide rates among emergency services is higher than general population. And it sucks to think about, but it's one of those things that's a reality. And because of the amount of stuff you see. And so what is that from a standpoint, like how do you get notified? Because with fire, I don't know what they do in the full-time world either, but for us volunteers, if we've had a traumatic call, then one of us chiefs will make a decision and we'll call the team in, we'll page it out, they show up, we kind of do the thing. What does that look like for you guys? Because you, on a night, might see 2 or 3 terrible calls, or you might, it might be a normal night, whatever, but how do you navigate that? Is there a system in place, or is it kind of just a peer network? Or
both. It is a peer network. So I actually lead the peer support team for Elgin EMS. And there's a handful of us on the team. And we have extended our cell phone numbers to everyone and said they're on 24/7. If you need us, call us.
Yeah.
However, there is sort of a preset list, if you will. Sort of your typically really impactful calls. Right. And dispatch can let our management know, and then our management team will call. We have one person on call each month. And that person will receive the call from management. So it might be 2 a.m, and they'll get a call saying, hey, this crew or these crews just participated in this call. There's not a lot of details, but enough just so we at least understand what the call is and who was involved. And then we take it from there. The team takes it from there, because people are more apt to talk to a peer than they are a management. Right. Maybe they're afraid, I don't want to tell my manager that I can't do it, or, that I need to go home, or that, it's really bothering me. And so they're more apt to talk to a peer. And probably, I know you're on the fire team. So as you know, it's, talking is one of the biggest things that, has to happen in order to sort of process this and get through that situation. And so we would reach out either by phone or going to see the crew, depending on sort of the situation at hand. And we'd talk through it. And there's about 3 reach out points, I guess, sort of based on research, those impactful moments, sort of right after the situation, about 24-ish hours later, and then again about 72 hours after that. And then, from there we can refer to, EAP or to different services, if they needed to go and see somebody else, and we can go with them, or we can try and get that paperwork together to go and do that, and basically just help as much as we can.
Okay. Beautiful.
So, and then there's a lot that just say, no, I'm okay, thanks. And that's okay too. Because as much as people say it's okay to not be okay, it's also okay to be okay.
Right. Because that is part of your job. And I've been on long enough, we've talked about this. There's calls that you think, well, that's going to really affect me, and then they don't. And other calls where you're like, why is this bugging me so much?
It's usually a personal connection.
Right. So one of the things I did want to mention here, people tend to want to ask the question, what's the worst thing you've seen? And I don't know why that is. I don't know what that is within us.
Intrigue, I think. Right? Curiosity.
But it's one of the things that if anybody's listening and anybody cares for my opinion, it's definitely a question I wouldn't ask of most first responders. I mean, it depends on your relationship with the person, depends on how open that person is, all that kind of stuff. But you're basically asking that person to unveil one of the more traumatic things they've ever gone through in their life.
Yes.
For your entertainment.
Yes. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And I would probably, not go so far out on a limb and say that that's probably the worst question. At least I can speak from, from emergency services side. It's the worst question you could ask somebody. And probably the most unintentionally disrespectful question that you can ask.
They're not trying to hurt you. They're not
absolutely
being like, hey,
not.
Can I traumatize you more?
No, not at all. And they're actually genuinely curious about you and your job. And that's why it's hard, because you're like, I want to be polite, but I don't want to answer this question.
So you had a great way of going around it. So when somebody asks you, let's just get to that question. So what is your favorite thing about doing this job? Because no one calls 911 and is like, hey, we got some leftover donuts. I don't know if your medic's on. They're always calling for trauma. So what are your favorite calls? What are your highlights?
Well, you're right. You mostly see people on their worst day. Right. But delivering a baby. So it doesn't always happen. So you've got basically 2 really good things that come from being a medic, and you don't always see them in your career in general. Some people will work an entire career, full career, and never have any. And if you do have any, you can count them on one hand for sure. And that is delivering a baby and getting a save. So if if someone has been vital signs absent, and you are able to bring them back, then that's wonderful.
That's pretty wild.
So thankfully, I've actually been able to do both. I've delivered 2 babies, a boy and a girl, and I was able to be involved in. I certainly was not the only person involved in that. There was many people, and probably the most important were the ones that came before me, before EMS even arrived. But I was able to be involved in a save actually. So
Very cool.
So it was interesting. You don't, even though you are seeing this person on probably one of the, in terms of having a baby, it's happy time, but it's still very stressful time for mom and dad. So whether it's that or whether it's obviously the worst day of that other person's life, if they were vital signs absent, but it ended up turning around and being a positive thing, which is wonderful. And like I said, you don't always get to experience that. So,
okay, so I want to talk to you about something that we hear a lot about, but I don't know if a lot of us understand it very well, and that is the opioid crisis. So you've heard this on the news. You hear a lot of people talk about it. Even now with COVID, a lot of the stats that are coming out are saying like, yes, COVID is bad, but these other numbers are also going up, and one of them is this opioid.
That's the when someone has COVID and are on opioids
I'm just making
as well.
up words as we go here. Good night. This opioid thing. So you do, and the reason we're asking you have a bit of authority because you also teach. So when we were joking before that you're an awesome instructor, because you're one of our key instructors at the fire hall. So you work, you do a lot of training. So can you explain to us a little bit the way opioids work and why this has become a crisis? And I mean, obviously, there's long documentaries on all this, but just if you can, from a bit of a basic standpoint, help us understand opioids, and then that's going to lead us into Narcan and what Narcan does and how it works.
Well, I guess back in the day, and I don't know how far down that rabbit hole you want to go, but back in the day in mining communities and everything, some pharmaceutical companies came up with this new drug called OxyContin, right? So you're basically your Percocets, or Oxys, if you will. A lot of people will just refer to them as that. They're painkillers. And they would go and say, oh, these are great. They're, non-addictive. Everything's wonderful. And, especially in these mining towns, that's sort of where it all started. You're going to have your back injuries, your knee injuries, your shoulder injuries. And so doctors were just giving them out like candy, just there you go. They're non-addictive, so they're great. And they worked really well. They were fantastic until, the pharmaceutical company said, well, actually they're highly addictive or bad. So now you've got a lot of people addicted to, these opioids or these, what some would have called narcotics before. And so then they changed it, and then they became anything that is an addictive, it becomes abused, right? So, I mean, the same thing happens with when someone's addicted to alcohol. And you're going to find that people will sort of stray from the mainstream if they can't get it that way. So if they have the ability to go to the liquor store and buy alcohol, and that's great. But for those who can't, maybe they're using mouthwash, maybe they're using whatever. The same thing holds true with drugs. So once the doctors are saying, oh, well, now these are very highly addictive, we've learned that, I think maybe there's a problem here with whomever they're speaking with. Maybe they're cutting them off, maybe they're weaning them off, and now they're left to their own devices. This person is addicted, and an addiction is a mental game. It's I would consider it a disease because it's bigger than that person at that point. It's not just, it's not just a choice to go and use these drugs at that point. And so now they're sort of, I hesitate to use the word forced, but, in their addicted mind, they're forced to go and find it elsewhere. And so they're finding it on the streets. So then they came out with Oxy Neos, which is, again, I'm not entirely certain, but it's basically the way they manufacture it. It can't as easily be crushed up and melted down and injected and whatnot. And so oxys became, because of these changes, to try and avert the opioid crisis, people started to go towards fentanyl and then carfentanil. And that comes in a variety of different ways. Maybe it's pills, maybe it's patches, maybe it's whatever. There's still oxys out and about. There's a bunch of different, different morphines. Yep. There's even codeine is technically an opioid. And opioids can be very, very therapeutic and used. I
was going to say, how do opioids work? Like, can you give me a shortened version of what they do to the body that makes them so effective?
So they basically block the pain receptors. Okay. So that you don't feel pain as much. And like I said, they go into your brain, they block the pain receptors. You no longer feel those pain and, down your nerve impulses and whatnot. And so they block the pain. But the biggest problem and why it's an issue, and the main reason why people will overdose and subsequently succumb to their overdose is because what it does is it's a respiratory depressant. So it'll block the pain, but it also inhibits your respiratory drive. So you stop breathing. And hence the problem. And hence why we have so many people, if you've taken too much of a dose of whatever it is, whatever opioid it is, and opioids are more than just fentanyl and carfentanil that we hear in the media. That's why, once you stop breathing, then your heart eventually stops as well. And so that's why we end up having all of these, deadly overdoses. And most of them, 99% of them are unintentional.
Well, I was going to say, and that the first time somebody came in to talk to us about it, they said something that I had never known before, but that was that a lot of the opioid addictions are accidental. It's not like you think of a lot of the other drugs where you're maybe at a rave or a party or something, you try a drug. This is, you went to the hospital and you had a knee injury. You went to the hospital, you had something, and you got addicted, or you got a pill and it helped you feel better. You didn't know at that point that you were going to be addicted to this. And that's where a lot of this is not your average, and I don't know how to say this without sounding, but not your average drug user. Like, it's not like you have a stereotype in your head that a lot of people do when they think of a drug user. They have an image, and this is not that. This could be anybody. It could be people who are incredibly successful. It could be anybody. Yeah. And that's where this has become such a crisis, because this was unintentional. For so many people, you took a pill, you literally wanted to get rid of your pain, which living with pain is horrendous.
Right.
And so you're trying to get rid of that pain, and now all of a sudden you have this addiction. And if you haven't been through addiction, and it's easy for people to go, just stop. It's just not as simple. If it was, they would have stopped. Like, I think for most addicts, they're not going, man, I love this. This was so good. I definitely don't ever want to be free again. They want to be free, and it's hard, and it's a challenge.
You're right. You're 100% right. I've actually had one thing I enjoy doing when I have, like you said, the typical, pictures in people's heads of drug addicts. I actually like having that heart to heart and saying, how do you feel about this? Like how, and the one woman that I spoke to said it perfectly. She's like, I'm trapped.
Yeah.
Because, she's like, yes, maybe I made that decision to take it that first time. In some cases, in some cases, you're right. It's because of a knee injury, but it gets bigger than that person. Yeah. And once that person realizes that they are addicted to it, then they feel trapped, and it's bigger than they are. And it's really, really difficult. I can't speak firsthand, but, even having some of these people as patients and whatnot, it's very difficult for them to walk away. And if anyone has known anyone who, maybe even is an alcoholic, same sort of deal. It's very difficult for them to just turn around and walk away. And you're also correct. It is, yes, you're very typical drug users. Yes, we see those a lot. However, you can walk into a very affluent, neighborhood with a lovely home and people who, make lots of money, and not your typical drug user that everyone would picture in their head. And, that person could be addicted to opioids because of, like you say, a knee injury, a back injury, or whatever. Right. And now I don't want to scare people, because yes, you could go and hurt your knee tomorrow, and your doctor might give you Percocet, and they can be used very therapeutically. Right.
And we've learned a lot, and that's that's part of it, is that we have now learned. But I think there's also a stigma that a lot of these crises have, and I think it's a dangerous thing to go, well, that could only happen to other people.
Oh, hugely dangerous.
This is something that could happen to you. It's something that you need to be aware of, and I think that gives us a level of compassion then to deal with those people who have those addictions actively. And so let's lead that into, I don't know if that's a great segue, but it's a segue I'm using. Narcan. Narcan is, I believe it's just the name of, it's a company. Is that, I don't know.
So Narcan is what we call a trade name. So that would be like Tylenol, Advil,
so
the actual
there's a drug.
Yeah.
And what is that drug?
Naloxone.
See? There you go. See?
So
the other guys would have all remembered that. It's just me that struggles to remember things.
You'll get there. It's okay.
I know. It's fine. So I'm doing this. It's basically my first aid refresher right here. So
next step, CPR. So naloxone how it works is it will block the pain receptors from the opioids attaching to them. And that's the problem, right? So the opioids attach to the pain receptors, and yes, it takes away the pain. That's not anybody's concern. The concern is that it's that respiratory drive depressant. So it makes you stop breathing, especially if you've taken too much. If you haven't taken too much, it might slow your breathing down a little bit, but nothing of concern.
Right.
But it's when you take too much and it'll slow that breathing down. So if the opioid doesn't connect to the pain receptor and it's blocked, then it won't do that. So Narcan will block that pain receptor or even kick the opioid off that pain receptor because the bond between Narcan and the pain receptor is much stronger than the bond between the opioid and the pain receptor, if that makes sense. So
well, it does to me. I don't know.
Narcan comes in and kicks that opioid off, say, get off, this is my turf, and it kind of settles in and blocks any effects of the opioid. The thing is that it's temporary. So Narcan doesn't last as long as the opioids do in the system. So what that means for people is that if you've taken Narcan, perhaps the patient comes back to, or the person comes back to, and everything appears fine. But as soon as that Narcan wears off, say 15 minutes, half an hour, maybe a little longer, it depends on each person's metabolism, then that opioid is still in that person's system and they run the risk of having it block those pain receptors again. They'll reattach to the pain receptors and they'll start to lower their breathing or decrease their breathing again. So it's still really important that person, go and get help or is watched at bare minimum, because there is definitely a risk of them, sort of falling under the overdose again.
All right, so we're definitely running out of time, but I do want to add a little bit more.
Sure.
So obviously, getting a first aid course and getting proper training and all this is ideal, but Narcan is widely available.
Widely
you
available.
Can go to any pharmacy. You can get some.
Public health.
So talk to me a little quickly, if you can. What would an overdose look like, and what can you expect when you give Narcan? Because it's so widely available, I'd love for everybody to just have the training, but because of they've given it, and I know why they're doing it. It's a good idea, but so I figured if we could spend a few minutes, what does an overdose look like? What should they do with the Narcan? What can they expect? And then I'll quit taking up all your time.
No, that's fine. So first of all, people should know that Narcan or naloxone only works for an opioid overdose.
All right.
So they could be overdosing on cocaine, crystal meth, anything else that isn't an opioid, and Narcan will have zero effect on that. So that's important to note, first of all. Secondly, if someone is overdosing on an opioids, basically what they will look like oftentimes, if they're unconscious, their breathing will be very, very slow or maybe not at all. They will often be very pale. Sometimes there might be evidence of drug use, either in and around the home or the area they are in, or maybe on their person, perhaps maybe some needle marks or what have you, although there's many different ways to take drugs, and so that isn't always the case. But what an opioid does also is it will make your pupils go very, very small, very constricted. And so both of your pupils will look like that if someone is high on opioids. So the paleness, I guess the slow breathing and the pinpoint pupils would be sort of those trademark, hallmark sort of signs of an opioid overdose. And then, again, you'd give the Narcan, I guess.
And that's just a spray.
Spray up the nose is the one that they give through the pharmacies and through public health. So you would just insert that up and just press firmly and, hope that it works. A lot of times it does, sometimes it doesn't.
And it can work very quick.
It can work very quick. Yeah, within a couple of minutes for sure. There have been times where, they're actually seeing now that there's fentanyl or there's Narcan-resistant fentanyl that is coming out. And everything is just sort of manufactured. And, in terms of the illicit drug use, it's manufactured in people's basements and backyards and stuff. Yeah. There are people, of course, who still are addicted and still get it from their doctor. Not that their doctors are doing anything wrong, but that's just, some ways that people get it. Anyway, so when people will come out of an overdose with Narcan, they're not always happy. So there's two things the brain loves, and that's, should I test you on this? Glucose and oxygen. So the brain loves glucose and oxygen. So if you consider that if someone is suffering from an opioid overdose, breathing very slowly, they're not getting a lot of oxygen to their brain.
Yep.
So when you give that person Narcan, it sort of reverses everything fairly suddenly. So they're sort of waking up with an oxygen-starved brain, if that makes sense. And so they're not, it would be somewhat similar to maybe someone who is suffering from low blood sugar.
Okay.
So sometimes they can be combative, sometimes they can be aggressive, sometimes they're neither of those things. But they might be a little confused, not really sure what's happening or where they are, until they can get breathing again and get oxygen, get a reoxygenated brain, if you will.
Yeah, it's so funny. At the beginning here, you're like, well, don't ask me anything to make me look stupid. And I'm like, well, I'm just hoping you don't turn around and ask me anything. So
you're doing fine.
Thank you. No, appreciate it. Okay, so with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. But
sure,
that has been super insightful. And for those of you guys who are watching, listening, do some research on this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that if it happens in front of you, you don't have time at that point to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
If I can make a little plug, take first aid CPR.
Yes,
go
definitely.
find a place, go take it. It is so widely available.
Mm-hmm.
And then for you guys, I know you're in front of me and I can't say to everybody, but our experience with the medics in Elgin has been awesome. And you guys are incredibly talented and you are a great resource. Really much appreciated. So thank you for all you do.
Well, thanks for coming out to our calls, being helpful.
Oh, we love it. 3 a.m, there's nowhere else I'd rather be than with you on a call. So that's awesome. So good.
You lie really well.
But with that, hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for watching, listening. We'll see you on the next one.